This human baby gave his only blanket to the shivering pregnant mother bear. Outside his house, what happened next will shock you. Let us know where you're watching from. The small wooden cabin sat alone at the edge of the vast pine forest, its windows glowing with warm light against the darkness of the winter night. Inside, little Noah Morgan slept peacefully in his crib, wrapped snugly in his favorite blue blanket. The blanket was special, handmade by his grandmother before she passed away, its soft fibers keeping him warm through the coldest nights of winter. Outside, snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, covering everything in a blanket of white. The temperature had dropped dangerously low, even for January in the mountains. Noah's parents, Lily and Jacob Morgan, had moved to this remote cabin to escape the noise and chaos of city life. They wanted to raise their son surrounded by nature, by the quiet beauty of the forest and its creatures. What they didn't expect was how harsh the winter would be, how the wind howled through the trees at night, how the snow piled higher than their doorstep. That night, as the storm intensified, something stirred in the darkness beyond their home. A large, dark shape moved slowly through the snow, leaving deep tracks behind. It was a mother bear, her belly swollen with cubs that would arrive in spring. She should have been hibernating, safe in a den, but something had disturbed her rest. Now she wandered through the bitter cold, desperate to find shelter before the freezing temperatures took her life and the lives of her unborn cubs. The bear's breath came out in ragged puffs of white as she struggled through the snow. Her normally thick fur couldn't keep out the biting cold, not in her weakened state. Her instincts told her to avoid humans, to stay deep in the forest, but the storm had disoriented her. She found herself approaching the cabin, drawn by the faint warmth it promised. With the last of her strength, she collapsed on the porch, her massive body shivering uncontrollably as snowflakes gathered on her dark fur. Inside, something woke little Noah from his sleep. At just 14 months old, he couldn't understand much about the world, but he possessed an innocence that adults had long forgotten. He heard a sound, not the familiar howl of the wind, but something different, something that stirred something deep within his tiny heart. Somehow, he managed to climb out of his crib, something he had never done before. His small feet padded across the wooden floor as he dragged his precious blanket behind him. Noah's parents slept deeply in the next room, exhausted from a long day of chopping wood and preparing for the weeks of winter still ahead. They didn't hear their son as he moved through the cabin, didn't notice as he somehow reached up and turned the handle of the front door, pushing it open just enough for his small body to squeeze through. The blast of cold air should have sent Noah crying back to the warmth of his home. But something drew him forward. In the glow of the porch light, he saw the bear, massive, frightening to any adult, but to Noah just another creature in need. The bear lifted her head weakly, her dark eyes meeting the baby's. There was no aggression in her gaze, only exhaustion and pain. Noah took another step forward, his tiny feet leaving prints in the fresh snow. The blanket dragged behind him, gathering snow. The bear watched him, too weak to move, too desperate to feel fear. What happened next would later be called a miracle by everyone who heard the story. With small, determined hands, Noah lifted his precious blanket, his only source of warmth in the bitter night, and took another step toward the massive creature. The bear made a soft sound, almost like a moan, as the baby approached. Noah wasn't afraid. He didn't understand fear yet, didn't know that bears were supposed to be dangerous. He only knew that the creature before him was cold, just like he would be cold without his blanket. With innocent determination, Noah stretched out his small arms and placed his grandmother's blanket across the bear's shivering body. The blue fabric looked tiny against the bear's massive form, covering only a small portion of her back. But the gesture itself contained a warmth that went beyond the physical. The bear's eyes, dull with exhaustion, seemed to brighten just slightly. She made no move to harm the child. Instead, she let out another soft sound, almost like a sigh. Noah reached out one small hand and placed it on the bear's snout, a touch so gentle it barely disturbed the snowflakes that had gathered there. For a long moment they stayed like that, the baby and the bear, connected by a small blue blanket, and something much deeper than words could express. The wind howled around them, but in that moment neither felt the cold. Then something even more extraordinary happened. The bear, gathering what little strength remained in her failing body, slowly pushed herself to her feet. The blanket slipped from her back, landing in the snow. Noah watched with curious eyes as the bear turned and lumbered heavily down the steps of the porch, disappearing into the dark forest beyond. The cold finally registered on Noah's skin, and he began to cry, his wails cutting through the howling wind. The sound woke his parents, who rushed from their bed in panic to find their front door open and their son sitting on the porch, tears freezing on his cheeks, his precious blanket gone. They scooped him up and hurried back inside, checking him frantically for injuries, wondering in horror how their baby had managed to open the door, how long he had been exposed to the deadly cold. They didn't yet notice the massive tracks in the snow, didn't yet understand what had happened on their porch while they slept. But the story was far from over. What happened next would change their lives forever, in ways none of them could have imagined on that cold winter night. As dawn broke the next morning, Jacob ventured outside to check the damage from the storm. The snow had finally stopped, and the world was silent, wrapped in a pristine white blanket that sparkled in the early morning light. He stepped onto the porch, his boots crunching in the fresh snow, when something caught his eye. There, pressed into the snow, were enormous paw prints, far larger than any dog's, and beside them, tiny footprints that could only belong to his son. "Lily," he called, his voice cracking with fear. "Lily, come here." Lily rushed outside, still holding Noah in her arms. When she saw the tracks, her face went pale. "Is that a bear?" Jacob knelt beside the tracks, his heart pounding. "A big one, and look." He pointed to where the smaller tracks met the larger ones. Noah was out here with it. Lily clutched her son tighter, her mind racing with horrifying possibilities. How is he not hurt? Why didn't it? She couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know," Jacob whispered, following the tracks with his eyes to where they disappeared into the forest. "But I think we need to find Noah's blanket." They searched the property but found no sign of the blue blanket. Noah kept pointing toward the forest, babbling in his baby language as if trying to tell them something important. His little face scrunched up with frustration when they couldn't understand. Over the next few days, Jacob set up motion-activated cameras around their property. If the bear returned, he wanted to know. Lily couldn't sleep, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin settling in the cold. Noah, however, seemed unfazed. He kept crawling to the window, pressing his tiny hands against the glass and staring into the forest as if waiting for something. A week passed, then 2. The temperatures remained brutally low, and Jacob worried about the bear. If it was a female preparing for hibernation, as the tracks suggested, she might be pregnant. In these temperatures, without proper shelter, she and her cubs wouldn't survive. On the 15th night after the encounter, as a full moon illuminated the snow-covered landscape, their cameras captured something extraordinary. The bear had returned. But she wasn't alone. Following behind her, trudging through the deep snow, was an older male bear, larger, stronger, his dark fur touched with silver around the muzzle. The footage showed the female bear approaching the porch, stopping at the exact spot where she had collapsed before. The male bear hung back, watching cautiously. Then, the female bear did something that made Jacob and Lily gasp when they reviewed the footage the next morning. She placed something on the porch, a small, dark bundle that was difficult to make out in the nighttime footage. When Jacob went to investigate at first light, he found Noah's blanket. Dirty, torn in places, but unmistakably the same blanket his grandmother had made. It had been carefully folded and placed on their doorstep, as if returned by a grateful borrower. "This isn't possible," Lily whispered, running her fingers over the blanket. "Bears they can't think like this." But the evidence was right in front of them. Somehow, the bear had not only taken the blanket, but had brought it back, and she'd brought another bear with her, as if for protection or support. That night, they washed the blanket and returned it to Noah, who hugged it tightly, burying his face in its familiar softness. He smiled, a knowing smile that seemed far too wise for his 14 months. 3 days later, a severe blizzard hit the region. Weather reports warned it would be the worst storm in 50 years. Jacob worked frantically to secure their home, bringing in extra firewood and checking their generator. As darkness fell and the storm intensified, the power went out, leaving them with only the fireplace and generator for heat and light. The wind screamed around their cabin, rattling the windows and howling through the trees. Noah was unusually agitated, crawling repeatedly to the door and trying to reach the handle. "He wants to go outside," Lily said, pulling him back for the 5th time. "I don't understand why he's so determined." Jacob stoked the fire, trying to keep the cabin warm as the temperature outside plummeted further. "He's probably just restless from being cooped up." But Noah's behavior grew more frantic as the night wore on. He began to cry, not his usual tired or hungry cry, but something desperate and urgent. He clutched his blanket in one hand and pointed at the door with the other, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. "Something's wrong," Lily said, pacing with him. "He's trying to tell us something." A sudden crash against their door made them both jump. It wasn't the wind. It was a physical impact, as if something large had thrown itself against the wood. Jacob grabbed his rifle from the cabinet, his hands shaking. "Stay back," he told Lily, who retreated to the far corner of the room with Noah. The crash came again, harder this time. The door shuddered in its frame. Jacob aimed the rifle, his finger on the trigger, as the door finally gave way, swinging open to reveal the storm's fury, and in its midst, the massive form of the male bear. Lily screamed. Jacob prepared to fire. But before he could pull the trigger, Noah let out a cry, not of fear, but of recognition. He squirmed in his mother's arms, reaching toward the bear. The bear didn't enter. It stood in the doorway, its enormous body blocking most of the snow and wind. It made a low, rumbling sound, then turned its head toward the forest. "He wants us to follow him," Jacob said, lowering his rifle slowly. The words sounded insane even as he spoke them. "Are you crazy?" Lily clutched Noah tighter. "It's a wild animal, Jacob." "Look at Noah," Jacob said softly. "He's not afraid. He's been trying to go outside all night. I think he knows something we don't." The bear grunted again, more insistently this time, pawing at the snow outside the door. In that moment, Jacob made a decision that would seem like madness to anyone else. "Get Noah's snowsuit and the blanket. We're going." "Going where?" Lily's voice rose with panic. "Into a blizzard? Following a bear?" "Trust me," Jacob said, already pulling on his heavy coat. "Trust Noah." 5 minutes later, Bundled against the cold, they stepped out into the storm. The bear waited patiently, then turned and began walking toward the forest, looking back to ensure they followed. Jacob carried Noah, who had finally stopped crying. The baby pointed ahead, babbling excitedly despite the swirling snow and biting wind. They followed the bear into the forest, the snow so deep it reached Jacob's knees. Lily clung to his arm, certain they were walking to their deaths. But something, perhaps the same instinct that had awakened in Noah, told her this was right. The bear led them deeper into the woods, to a place where the trees grew so thick that they provided some shelter from the storm. And there, in a small clearing, they found the female bear, lying on her side, her breathing labored, her body convulsing with contractions. She was giving birth in the middle of a blizzard with no den to protect her newborn cubs. "She's going to lose them," Lily whispered, her medical training kicking in. Before moving to the mountains, she had been a nurse. "In this cold, without shelter, the cubs won't survive more than minutes." Noah squirmed in Jacob's arms, reaching down toward the snow. Jacob set him down carefully, keeping a hand on his snowsuit. To their amazement, Noah toddled toward the female bear, dragging his blanket behind him once again. The male bear watched, making no move to stop the baby. The female bear lifted her head weakly, recognizing the child who had shown her kindness before. Noah reached her side, and with the same gentle determination he had shown that first night, laid his blanket over her heaving flank. Lily stepped forward, her fear giving way to compassion. "We need to help her," she said to Jacob. "We need to get her somewhere warm." "The shed," Jacob replied, already thinking of the small outbuilding where he stored his tools. "It's insulated, if we can get her there." But how to move a laboring bear through a blizzard? The answer came in the form of the male bear, who seemed to understand their intentions. He moved closer to his mate, gently nudging her to her feet. She rose with great effort, leaning against his larger frame for support. Together, two humans, a baby, and two wild bears, they made their way back through the storm to the Morgan property. Jacob led them to the shed, hurriedly clearing a space on the floor and laying down old blankets and tarps. The female bear collapsed onto this makeshift bed, her contractions coming faster now. For the next 3 hours, Lily put her nursing skills to use in a way she never could have imagined, helping a wild bear deliver her cubs. The male bear stood guard at the door, occasionally looking in as if checking on their progress. Noah sat in a corner, wrapped in Jacob's coat, watching with wide, unblinking eyes. By dawn, 3 tiny cubs lay nestled against their mother's warm belly, mewling softly as they nursed for the first time. The smallest one, born last, had struggled to breathe at first. Lily had rubbed its tiny chest until it let out its first cry, a sound so small and perfect that it brought tears to her eyes. As the storm finally began to subside, Lily and Jacob looked at each other across the shed, both understanding that they had witnessed something beyond explanation. Noah had crawled closer to the bear family, sitting just within reach of the mother bear's massive paw. She extended it gently, touching his cheek with a tenderness that defied everything they had ever been taught about wild animals. "The blanket," Jacob said suddenly. She came back to return the blanket because she knew the storm was coming. She knew she needed help with the birth. "That's impossible," Lily whispered, but she couldn't deny what she had seen with her own eyes. The female bear looked at them, her dark eyes filled with an intelligence they had never credited to a wild creature. The smallest cub squeaked and squirmed, working its way out from under its siblings to crawl toward Noah. The mother bear watched, but made no move to stop it. The tiny cub, its eyes still closed, its fur wet and matted, pressed against Noah's leg. The baby giggled and gently patted its head, his touch as light as a feather. In that moment, something profound passed between them all. An understanding, a connection that transcended the boundaries between human and animal. The female bear had sought out human help in her most vulnerable moment, trusting the strange creatures who lived in the wooden structure, because one small being had shown her kindness when she needed it most. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light through the small windows of the shed, Lily and Jacob knew their lives would never be the same. They had been given a rare glimpse into a world where compassion crossed all barriers, where a baby's innocent act of giving could set in motion a chain of events that defied explanation. For 3 days, the Bear family remained in the shed. Lily and Jacob took turns bringing food and fresh water, moving cautiously but with growing confidence. The male bear would disappear for hours at a time, returning with small game he had hunted in the forest. He would drop his offerings at the shed door, then retreat to a respectful distance, watching as Jacob collected the meat and brought it to the mother bear. "It's like he's thanking us," Jacob said on the 3rd evening, as they watched from the cabin window. The male bear had brought a large rabbit, laying it carefully by the shed before loping back into the trees. "Like he's providing for all of us." Lily nodded, bouncing Noah on her hip. The baby had been unusually content since the birth of the cubs, as if some deep need in him had been satisfied. "I've been thinking," she said slowly. "What if we built them a proper shelter? Something closer to the forest edge, but still on our property. Somewhere they could be safe until spring." Jacob looked at his wife in amazement. "You want to build a home for wild bears? They're not just wild bears anymore," Lily said softly. "Not to us, not to Noah." And so, in the following days, as the mother bear regained her strength and the cubs grew stronger, Jacob began construction on a simple but sturdy shelter at the edge of their property. He used fallen logs and branches, creating a den-like structure partially dug into a small hillside, insulated with dry grass and leaves. It wasn't perfect, but it would provide better protection than the forest floor. Word of their unusual project spread quickly through the small mountain community. Most thought they had lost their minds. Some suggested calling wildlife authorities to relocate the bears. A few were openly hostile, concerned about the danger of having bears so close to human dwellings. "You're going to get your baby killed," said Frank Wilkins, their nearest neighbor, who lived 5 miles down the mountain road. He had driven up to their cabin after hearing rumors about the bears. "Those animals don't belong here, Jacob. They belong deep in the forest, away from people." "They chose to come here," Jacob replied firmly. "The mother sought us out when she needed help. We can't turn our backs on her now." Frank shook his head in disgust. "I'm calling Fish and Wildlife tomorrow. This is insanity." That night, Lily sat by Noah's crib, watching him sleep with his beloved blanket, now washed and repaired where the bear's claws had torn it. "What are we going to do?" she whispered to Jacob. "If they take the bears away?" Jacob had no answer. He knew Frank was right in one sense. Wild bears living near humans was a recipe for disaster under normal circumstances. But these circumstances were far from normal. Something extraordinary had happened between Noah and these bears, something that defied rational explanation. They were awakened before dawn by a frantic pounding on their door. Jacob grabbed his rifle, fearing the worst, but when he opened the door, he found Frank Wilkins standing there, his face ashen, his truck parked haphazardly in their yard. "My boy," Frank gasped, clutching Jacob's arm. "My Tommy. He went out hunting last night, didn't come home. I've been searching for hours." Lily appeared behind Jacob, pulling her robe tighter. "Tommy's missing? In this weather?" Tommy Wilkins was 16, Frank's only child. He was known for his hunting skills and his knowledge of the forest, but even experienced woodsmen could get lost in these mountains, especially in winter. "I'll get dressed," Jacob said immediately. "We'll organize a search party." But before he could turn away, they heard a low, rumbling growl from behind Frank. The male bear stood at the edge of the yard, his massive form silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Frank reached for his sidearm, but Jacob grabbed his wrist. "Wait," he said urgently, "just wait." The bear made that same distinctive sound they had heard during the blizzard. Not threatening, but insistent. He pawed at the ground, then turned toward the forest, looking back expectantly. "He wants us to follow him," Jacob said. Frank stared in disbelief. "You've lost your mind, Morgan." "Trust me," Jacob said, already pulling on his boots. "Lily, stay with Noah. Frank, leave your gun. Come with me." Perhaps it was desperation that made Frank agree, or perhaps he saw something in Jacob's certainty that convinced him. Either way, the two men followed the bear into the forest as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. The bear led them along a path that neither would have chosen, through dense underbrush and across a frozen stream. After 20 minutes of difficult hiking, they heard a faint cry. There, at the bottom of a steep ravine, lay Tommy Wilkins, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face pale with cold and pain. "Dad," he called weakly when he saw the men. "Dad, I'm here." Frank scrambled down the ravine, heedless of the danger, with Jacob close behind. Tommy was hypothermic, his broken leg making it impossible for him to climb out of the ravine where he had fallen during his hunt. He would not have survived another night. As they worked to stabilize Tommy's leg and prepare to carry him out, Frank kept glancing at the bear, who watched from the top of the ravine. "How did it know?" he whispered to Jacob. "How did it know where to find my boy?" Jacob had no answer, but as they struggled to carry Tommy up the steep slope, the bear did something that left them both speechless. He moved to a spot where the incline was less severe, almost like a natural path, and waited, as if showing them the easiest way up. By the time they got Tommy back to the Morgan cabin, word had spread through the small community. Neighbors arrived with food, blankets, and offers of help. The doctor from the town 30 miles away fought his way through the snow-covered roads to set Tommy's leg properly. As the doctor worked, Frank pulled Jacob aside. "I don't understand what happened out there," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I won't be calling Fish and Wildlife. Whatever's going on between your family and those bears, it saved my son's life." The story of Tommy's rescue spread quickly, growing with each telling. People from neighboring towns began to visit, hoping to catch a glimpse of the miracle bears. Some brought offerings of food, leaving them at the edge of the Morgan property. Others came with cameras, hoping to document the extraordinary relationship between the human family and the wild bears. Lily and Jacob tried to maintain their privacy, to protect the bears from too much human attention. But as spring approached and the snow began to melt, they realized their story had grown beyond their control. A reporter from a national news network showed up one day, camera crew in tow, asking for an interview about the baby who saved the bears and the bears who saved the town. "We didn't save the town," Jacob protested. "They helped find one lost boy, that's all." But it wasn't all, as they soon discovered. 2 days after the reporter left, disappointed by their refusal to be interviewed, a forest fire broke out 10 miles to the north. The unusually dry spring had left the forest vulnerable, and strong winds pushed the flames toward the small cluster of homes and businesses that made up their mountain community. Evacuation orders went out. Families packed what they could and fled down the mountain. Lily and Jacob loaded their truck, but Jacob hesitated before starting the engine. "The bears," he said. "We can't leave them." Lily looked toward the shelter they had built, where the mother bear still lived with her cubs, now the size of small dogs, playful and curious about the world. The male bear came and went, but always returned, his presence a comforting constant in their lives. "We'll open the shelter," Lily decided, "give them a chance to flee deeper into the forest, away from the fire," but when they approached the shelter they found it empty. The bear family was already gone. As they drove down the winding mountain road, the sky darkened with smoke, and ash began to fall like gray snow. They joined the line of vehicles heading for the evacuation center in the valley below, their hearts heavy with worry for the creatures they had come to love. At the center, chaos reigned. Families huddled together, clutching precious belongings, pets, and each other. Noah was fussier than usual, crying and pointing back toward the mountain they had fled. Lily tried to comfort him, but nothing seemed to help. "He misses them," she told Jacob that night, as they tried to sleep on cots in the high school gymnasium that had been converted into a shelter. "He knows they're in danger." Jacob squeezed her hand in the darkness. "They're wild animals, Lily. Their instincts will guide them away from the fire." But as dawn broke and reports came in of the fire's progression, it became clear that the wind had shifted during the night. The flames had jumped the firebreak the Forestry Service had hastily created and were now moving directly toward their small community. Firefighters worked desperately to protect the homes and businesses, but the fire was simply too large, too hungry. Then something extraordinary happened. Reports began coming in from the firefighters on the front lines. Bears, dozens of them, had emerged from the forest ahead of the flames, not fleeing in panic as wildlife normally would, but moving with purpose, digging at the earth with their powerful claws, creating a natural break in the forest floor that slowed the fire's advance. "It's impossible," the fire chief said, showing Jacob and Lily footage on his phone captured by one of his men. "I've been fighting forest fires for 30 years. I've never seen anything like it." But there it was, unmistakable in the grainy video, bears working together, led by a massive male with silver around his muzzle, and a smaller female with 3 cubs who stayed close to her side. They clawed at the earth, pulled down burning branches, and in one astonishing moment captured on film, formed a living chain to rescue a trapped fox from a burning thicket. The fire was contained by nightfall, thanks in part to a providential rain shower and the tireless efforts of the firefighters. But everyone knew the truth. Without the bear's inexplicable intervention, the entire community would have been lost. When the evacuation order was finally lifted 3 days later, Jacob and Lily returned to find their cabin untouched by the fire. The flames had stopped just short of their property line, as if some invisible barrier had protected it. Noah toddled straight to his window, pressing his hands against the glass and babbling excitedly. Outside, at the edge of the charred forest, stood the bear family. The cubs, now noticeably larger, tumbled and played in the ash-covered grass while their mother watched. The male bear stood slightly apart, his powerful form silhouetted against the blackened trees. As the Morgans watched, other bears emerged from the forest, 5, then 10, then more, until 20 bears of various sizes stood in silent formation behind the family they had come to know so well. "It's like..." Jacob struggled to find the words. "It's like they're saying goodbye." Lily felt tears filling her eyes. "We're saying thank you." They stood at the window, the 3 of them, as the bears turned one by one and disappeared back into the forest. The mother bear was the last to leave, her cubs trailing behind her. She paused, looking directly at the cabin, at the small boy whose simple act of kindness had created a bond that transcended the natural order. Noah pressed his face against the window, his small hand raised in farewell. The mother bear rose on her hind legs for a moment, her powerful form reaching toward the sky before dropping back to all fours and following her family into the depths of the forest. They never saw the bear family again, though sometimes, on quiet winter nights when the moon was full, they would hear a distinctive rumbling call from the forest edge, a reminder of the extraordinary connection that had been forged between two worlds. Noah grew quickly, as children do. By his third birthday, he no longer remembered the bears consciously, though sometimes Lily would catch him staring into the forest with an intensity that reminded her of those miraculous days. His blue blanket remained his most treasured possession, long after it had become worn and faded. The story of the bears spread far beyond their small mountain community, though many dismissed it as an exaggeration or an outright fabrication. Wildlife experts explained away the bears' behavior during the fire as a simple coincidence, a natural response to the threat that humans had misinterpreted. The video footage was analyzed and reanalyzed, declared both authentic and manipulated by different experts. But the people who had witnessed it, the firefighters, the residents of the small town, and most of all, the Morgan family, knew the truth. Something extraordinary had happened in those mountains, something that began with a baby's simple gesture of compassion. 5 years after the fire, on a crisp autumn day, Noah, now a talkative, curious 6-year-old, came running into the house, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, Dad, come quick," he called, tugging at their hands. "Look what I found." He led them to the edge of their property, to a spot where the forest had regrown after the fire, lush and green. There, nestled in the undergrowth, was a small blue fabric scrap, unmistakably a piece of his beloved blanket, which had finally fallen apart the previous winter. Beside it lay a perfect circle of pine cones, arranged with deliberate care. "It's a present," Noah said with absolute certainty, "from my friends." Jacob and Lily exchanged glances, a familiar wonder filling their hearts. The bears were long gone, moved deeper into the wilderness as human development encroached further up the mountain, yet somehow the connection remained. That night, as they tucked Noah into bed, Lily asked him, "How did you know it was from your friends?" The pine cones could have been arranged by the wind or by other children playing in the woods. Noah looked at her with the same wise expression he had worn as a baby, an old soul gazing out from a child's eyes. "Because," he said simply, "kindness always comes back to you. That's what my heart tells me." As Jacob turned out the light, leaving only the soft glow of Noah's nightlight illuminating the room, he thought about the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with his son's innocent generosity. A baby giving his only blanket to a shivering bear on a cold winter night. In that moment, he understood the true miracle they had witnessed. It wasn't that the bears had acted against their nature. It was that they had revealed the deeper nature that all living creatures share, the capacity for compassion, for connection, for gratitude that transcends the barriers of species and language. And in a world that too often forgot these simple truths, that was the most shocking revelation of all. Years continued to pass, and the Morgan family's story became something of a local legend. Though mainstream media had largely dismissed the tale as an embellished folk story, their small mountain community embraced it wholeheartedly. The town even incorporated a bear into its official seal, and the annual Kindness Festival drew tourists from surrounding states each winter. Noah grew into a thoughtful, compassionate teenager with an uncanny connection to animals of all kinds. Wounded creatures seemed to find their way to the Morgan property, from injured deer to orphaned fox kits. Noah would sit with them for hours, his presence somehow calming even the most frightened wild animals. By the time he was 15, he had decided to become a wildlife veterinarian. his childhood experience shaping his future in ways his parents had never anticipated. On Noah's 16th birthday, Jacob and Lily surprised him with a special gift. A small cabin built on the exact spot where they had once constructed the shelter for the Bear family. It was a simple structure, just one room, with a bed, a desk, and a wood stove. But the large windows offered a panoramic view of the forest. "Your thinking place," Jacob called it, as Noah explored the cabin with shining eyes. "Somewhere you can be close to the forest and remember." "I never forgot, Dad," Noah said quietly, running his hand along the rough-hewn timber walls. "Not really." That night, while his parents slept in the main house, Noah stayed in his new cabin. He left the windows open despite the autumn chill, listening to the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant call of coyotes. As midnight approached, he drifted into a light sleep, only to be awakened by a familiar sensation, the feeling of being watched. Noah sat up slowly, his heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. Outside, illuminated by the full moon's silver light, stood a bear. Not the enormous male he remembered from his childhood, nor the mother with her cubs, but a young adult bear, perhaps 4 or 5 years old. It watched him through the window with intelligent eyes, its head tilted slightly as if considering the human youth before it. Around its neck hung something unusual, what looked like a frayed piece of blue fabric, somehow fashioned into a crude collar. Noah's breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. And yet, what else could explain it? A fragment of his blanket, preserved and passed down, perhaps from mother to cub. Moving with deliberate slowness, Noah approached the window. The bear remained motionless, watching. Noah raised his hand in greeting, pressing his palm against the glass. To his astonishment, the bear raised its paw and placed it against the window, mirroring his gesture, the massive pad dwarfing his human hand with only the thin glass separating them. Tears filled Noah's eyes as a flood of memories washed over him. Not the conscious memories of childhood, but something deeper, more primal. He remembered the feel of rough fur under his baby hands, the warmth of a massive body in the bitter cold, the trust that had flowed between them. "Hello, friend," he whispered. The bear held his gaze for a long moment, then lowered its paw and turned away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Noah didn't tell his parents about the encounter. Some experiences were too sacred, too personal to share. But from that night forward, he spent every possible moment in his cabin, watching and waiting. The bear returned 3 nights later, and again the following week. Each time, it would approach the cabin, spend some time watching Noah through the window, then melt back into the forest. Noah began leaving small offerings, berries, nuts, occasionally a piece of fish. The bear would accept these gifts with surprising gentleness, using lips instead of teeth to take food from the small platform Noah had built outside his window. As winter approached, Noah's nightly visitor became a regular part of his life. He started keeping a journal, meticulously documenting the bear's behavior, its preferences, the subtle changes in their interaction. Without realizing it, he was conducting groundbreaking research on bear cognition and interspecies communication. Dr. Elena Petrov, a renowned wildlife biologist who had been studying the unusual bear behavior in the region for years, heard about Noah's experiences through local channels. She arrived at the Morgan home one snowy December afternoon, skeptical but intrigued. "I've been tracking the descendants of what locals call the kindness bears for nearly a decade," she explained over coffee in the Morgan kitchen. "Their behavior patterns are unlike anything documented in ursine research. They show advanced problem-solving abilities, complex social structures that extend beyond family groups, and most remarkably, a complete lack of aggression toward humans in the area. Jacob and Lily exchanged glances. They had noticed the absence of bear attacks in their community over the years, but had never connected it to their own experience. "Would you be willing to share Noah's observations?" Dr. Petrov asked. "They could be invaluable to my research." Noah, 17 by then and preparing for college, agreed with one condition: that the location of their property and the identity of his bear friend remain protected. He feared what might happen if word spread too widely, if tourists or poachers or overzealous researchers descended on the forest. Dr. Petrov agreed, and thus began a collaboration that would eventually challenge everything science thought it knew about animal cognition, emotional memory, and interspecies relationships. Using non-invasive observation methods, cameras mounted around the property, recordings of vocalizations, and Noah's detailed journals, they documented behaviors that defied conventional understanding. The bear, whom Noah had named Blue in honor of the blanket, displayed recognition of complex patterns, tool use, and most astonishingly, what appeared to be a form of symbolic communication using arrangements of objects. The pine cone circles Noah had first discovered as a child were just the beginning. Blue began leaving increasingly complex arrangements: stones in geometric patterns, branches woven into simple structures, berries placed in color sequences that couldn't possibly be random. "It's like she's trying to talk to you," Dr. Petrov said one evening, reviewing footage of Blue, carefully placing colored leaves in a spiral pattern. "Building a bridge between your world and hers." Noah nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I think she's been trying all along, since that first night when her mother accepted my blanket." As Noah's high school graduation approached, Dr. Petrov helped him secure a scholarship to a prestigious university with a leading wildlife biology program. His research with Blue had attracted attention in academic circles, though the full story of the Morgan family's history with the bears remained private. The night before Noah was to leave for college, he sat in his cabin, heart heavy with the knowledge that he would be separated from Blue for months. They had formed a bond that transcended conventional understanding, and the thought of breaking it, even temporarily, filled him with sadness. As if sensing his emotions, Blue appeared at his window earlier than usual that evening. She carried something in her mouth, a small branch with fresh spring leaves. She placed it carefully on the platform where Noah usually left food, then backed away, watching him expectantly. Noah opened the window and took the branch, recognizing it as a species that didn't grow in the immediate area. Blue must have traveled miles to find it. The gesture moved him deeply, a goodbye gift from one friend to another. "I'll come back," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Wait for me." Blue made a soft huffing sound, almost like a sigh, then turned and lumbered into the forest. Noah watched until her dark form disappeared among the trees, wondering if she understood that he was leaving, if she would remember him when he returned. University life was a dramatic change from the quiet mountains. Noah excelled academically, but struggled socially, finding it difficult to relate to peers who hadn't experienced the profound connection with nature that had shaped his life. He threw himself into his studies, supplementing his wildlife biology major with courses in comparative psychology, neuroscience, and indigenous knowledge systems. During his sophomore year, a devastating piece of news reached him. Poachers had been active in the mountains near his home, targeting bears for their gallbladders, which commanded high prices in certain black markets. 3 bears had been killed, their bodies left mutilated in the forest. Noah flew home immediately, sick with fear for Blue. His parents met him at the small regional airport, their faces grave. No sign of Blue, Jacob said as they drove up the mountain road. But Doctor, Petrov found tracks that match her size heading deeper into the wilderness, away from where the poaching occurred. She thinks Blue is smart enough to avoid the danger zones. The whole community is up in arms, Lily added. People are organizing patrols, working with the game wardens. These bears mean something to everyone now, not just to us. Back in his cabin that night, Noah left the windows open despite the cold, hoping against hope that Blue would sense his return. Hours passed with no sign of her. He drifted into an uneasy sleep just before dawn, dreaming of running through endless forest, searching for his friend. A soft thud against the window woke him. The morning sun illuminated Blue's massive form as she pressed her snout against the glass, her breath fogging the pain. Noah scrambled to his feet, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. "You're alive," he whispered, placing his hand against the glass. Blue mirrored his gesture with her paw, as she always had. Over the next 2 days, Noah noticed something different about Blue's behavior. She seemed anxious, restless, constantly looking back toward the deeper forest. On the third morning, he understood why. Blue arrived at dawn, but not alone. Behind her, moving hesitantly, was another bear. An enormous male with distinctive silver markings around his face. Noah's heart nearly stopped. It couldn't be, and yet the resemblance was unmistakable. This was the same male bear that had helped save Tommy Wilkins all those years ago, the one who had stood guard while the mother bear delivered her cubs in the storm. He had to be at least 15 years old now, ancient for a wild bear, yet he moved with deliberate dignity as he followed Blue to the cabin window. The old bear studied Noah with rheumy eyes that held a flicker of recognition. "You remember," Noah breathed, amazed. "After all this time." The old bear lifted his massive head, scenting the air. He made a low, rumbling sound in his chest, not aggressive, but communicative. Blue responded with a soft chuffing, almost as if they were discussing the human before them. Then, with surprising gentleness, the old bear placed something on the platform outside the window, a scrap of fabric so faded and dirty that Noah almost didn't recognize it. But as he looked closer, his breath caught. Another piece of his blanket, preserved all these years. The message couldn't have been clearer if the bear had spoken in human language. "I remember you. I remember the kindness." That night, Noah made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He contacted his academic advisor and arranged to continue his studies remotely for the semester, explaining that he needed to conduct field research in his home region. With Dr. Petrov's support, he developed an independent study focused on the unusual bear population in the mountains. What began as a temporary arrangement became a life's calling. Noah's cabin evolved into a small research station, equipped with cameras and sensors that allowed him to document the extraordinary behaviors of what scientists now referred to as the cognizant bears of the northern range. His research revealed something astonishing. The bears had developed a distinct culture, passing knowledge from generation to generation through observation and direct teaching. Blue's behavior wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a larger pattern that had begun the night a baby offered his blanket to a suffering mother bear, creating a ripple effect of changed behavior that spread through the local bear population. By the time Noah completed his doctoral dissertation, Interspecies Empathy and its Evolutionary Implications, the scientific community could no longer dismiss the Morgan family's story as mere folklore. The evidence was too compelling, the documentation too thorough. On a crisp autumn day, much like the one when he had first received his cabin, Noah stood before a small gathering on the Morgan property, his parents, now gray-haired but still vibrant. Dr. Petrov and her research team, representatives from wildlife conservation organizations, and a handful of government officials. "Today, we establish the Northern Range Wildlife Sanctuary," he announced, his voice carrying across the clearing where the ceremony was being held. 10,000 acres of forest, permanently protected from development and hunting, where the relationship between humans and wildlife can evolve based on mutual respect rather than fear. The sanctuary had been years in the making, funded by a combination of research grants, private donations, and Noah's own earnings from his best-selling book about Blue and her kin. It would serve as both a protected habitat and a research center where scientists could study the remarkable cognitive abilities of the region's wildlife. As the small crowd applauded, a movement at the forest edge caught Noah's attention. There, partially hidden by the trees, stood Blue. She was older now, her muzzle touched with gray, but her eyes were as bright and intelligent as ever. Beside her stood two younger bears, presumably her cubs, nearly grown. Noah smiled, a private acknowledgement passing between them. The bears didn't approach. They never did when other humans were present, but their presence was a validation of everything he had worked for. That evening, after the guests had departed, Noah sat alone on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset paint the forest in shades of gold and amber. The sound of heavy footfalls made him turn his head. Blue emerged from the trees, alone this time, and approached the cabin with the familiar confidence of an old friend visiting. She stopped a few feet away, closer than she had ever come before. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence, man and bear, connected by a thread of understanding that had begun with a baby's innocent gesture of compassion. Then Blue did something unprecedented. She lowered herself to the ground, her massive body settling into a relaxed position right there on Noah's porch. She yawned, showing impressive teeth, then laid her head on her paws, eyes still fixed on Noah. The message was unmistakable. Trust, safety, peace. Noah remained perfectly still, overcome with emotion. This wasn't just a visit, it was a statement. Blue was demonstrating the ultimate trust, making herself vulnerable by resting in human presence. Slowly, giving her every chance to retreat if she wished, Noah extended his hand. Blue watched, unmoving, as his fingers drew closer to her head. When he finally made contact with her rough fur, she closed her eyes briefly, accepting his touch. It was the culmination of a lifetime of patience and respect on both sides, a moment that embodied everything Noah had come to believe about the capacity for connection between species. Not domination or control, but mutual acknowledgement of each other's sentience and worth. As darkness fell, Blue eventually rose and returned to the forest, leaving Noah with a certainty that transcended scientific observation or data. The simple act of kindness that had begun their story, a baby giving his blanket to a suffering bear, had not just changed one family's life or one community's relationship with wildlife. It had revealed a profound truth about the world, that compassion creates connections that defy our expectations, and that understanding flows in both directions across the supposed divide between humans and animals. 20 years later, a small child visited the Northern Range Wildlife Sanctuary with her parents. Now a world-renowned conservation area and research center, the sanctuary welcomed thousands of visitors each year who came to learn about the unique bear population and the groundbreaking work being done there. The little girl, just 4 years old, clutched a worn blue blanket as she listened to the tour guide explain how the sanctuary had begun with a simple act of kindness. A baby who had once given his blanket to a cold bear. And even today, the guide said, gesturing toward the observation platform where visitors could safely watch the bears in their natural habitat. The descendants of those original bears show behaviors unlike any others in the world. They use tools, create symbolic communications, and most remarkably show no fear of humans while still maintaining their wild nature. As if on cue, a bear appeared at the edge of the clearing below the platform. It was female, with distinctive markings that the researchers had learned to recognize as markers of Blue's lineage. The bear paused, looking directly at the gathered humans with what seemed like curiosity rather than wariness. The little girl gasped in delight, pointing with a chubby finger. "Bear!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying in the quiet air. The bear's head turned sharply toward the sound. For a moment, its gaze locked with the child's, an instant of connection across species. Then, to the amazement of everyone present, the bear approached the observation platform, stopping directly below where the little girl stood. The girl's mother reached for her, protective, but the tour guide gently intervened. "It's all right," he said softly. "This is extraordinary behavior, but not unprecedented. The bears here sometimes show special interest in children, particularly very young ones." The bear rose on its hind legs, bringing its head level with the platform railing. The little girl, fearless in her innocence, held out her blue blanket for the bear to see. "Cold?" she asked, her child's mind making the simple connection between blankets and warmth, between need and giving. The bear made a soft huffing sound, almost like a sigh of recognition, then dropped back to all fours and retreated into the forest, leaving the visitors murmuring in amazed disbelief. The tour guide smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He was older now, his hair touched with silver, but anyone who knew the story would have recognized Noah Morgan in his weathered face, in the quiet certainty with which he spoke. "And that," he told the wide-eyed child and her astonished parents, "is how it continues. Generation to generation the memory passes down, the kindness is remembered." That night, long after the visitors had departed, Noah stood alone at the edge of the sanctuary that had become his life's work. In the distance, he could just make out the shape of a bear, not Blue, who had passed years before, but one of her descendants, carrying her legacy forward. The bear lifted its head, as if sensing his presence, and for a moment, Noah felt the familiar connection that had defined his existence since that winter night so long ago. The understanding that had been born when a baby gave his blanket to a shivering bear had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. A bridge between worlds that had once seemed impossibly separate. And that, perhaps, was the most shocking revelation of all. Not that it had happened, but that it continued to unfold, a living testament to the power of compassion to transform not just individual lives, but the very course of evolution itself. 50 years passed. The Northern Range Wildlife Sanctuary had become a globally recognized center for interspecies communication studies. Noah Morgan, now in his late 70s, had received every honor the scientific community could bestow, from the Nobel Prize to countless conservation awards. His research had revolutionized humanity's understanding of animal cognition and transformed wildlife management practices worldwide. But on this particular autumn evening, awards and accolades were far from Noah's mind. He sat in a wheelchair on the porch of his cabin, the same cabin his father had built for him all those decades ago, though expanded and renovated over the years. His body had grown frail with age, his once vigorous frame now thin, his movements slowed by arthritis. The doctors had given him months, perhaps weeks. The cancer had spread too far, too fast. Noah had refused hospital care for his final days, choosing instead to return to the place where it had all begun. His daughter Ellie, named after Dr. Elena Petrov, who had passed away years before, sat beside him, holding his hand. Her own daughter, Clara, played nearby, arranging pine cones in the intricate patterns that the sanctuary bears were known for. "Do you think she'll come?" Ellie asked softly, her eyes on the forest edge. The sun was setting, painting the trees in gold and crimson. Noah nodded slowly. "She knows," he said simply. Azure was the last direct descendant of Blue, a massive female bear with the same intelligent eyes and distinctive white patch on her chest. Over the years, Noah had formed a bond with each generation of Blue's family, watching as the unique behaviors and cognitive abilities passed down through the bloodline. Azure was special, though, more attuned to human emotion than any bear before her, more deliberate in her communications. As darkness began to fall, Ellie lit the lanterns that lined the porch, their warm glow pushing back against the gathering shadows. Clara came to sit at her grandfather's feet, sensing the solemnity of the moment. "Tell me again, Grandpa," she said, her 7-year-old voice small in the vast silence of the forest, "about when you were a baby and you gave your blanket away." Noah smiled, reaching down to stroke her hair with a trembling hand. "I don't remember it myself," he said, his voice thin but warm. "I was too young, but my parents told me the story so many times that it feels like my own memory." As he began the familiar tale, a movement at the forest edge caught their attention. Clara gasped, pointing with excitement. "Look!" There, emerging from the trees, came Azure. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, moving with deliberate dignity, came 12 more bears of various ages and sizes, descendants of those original bears that had saved the town from fire, direct bloodlines from the mother bear who had accepted a baby's offering on a cold winter night. They formed a semicircle at the edge of the clearing, watching the humans on the porch with calm, intelligent eyes. Azure moved forward alone, approaching the cabin with the confident familiarity of countless visits over the years. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, her massive head level with Noah's feet in his wheelchair. For a long moment, bear and man regarded each other in silence, two beings who had spent a lifetime building a bridge between their worlds. Azure made a soft huffing sound, then did something she had never done before. She turned her head toward the forest and made a different vocalization, a call that carried through the evening air. From the trees, a small shape emerged, moving hesitantly toward the group. It was a cub, tiny compared to the adults, its fur still soft and new. Azure nudged it gently forward until it stood beside her, looking up at the humans with curious eyes. "Her newest cub," Ellie whispered, amazed. "I've never seen her bring it this close before." The cub studied them, head tilted in that characteristic way that reminded Noah so much of Blue. Then, with a suddenness that made Clara laugh in delight, it rose on its hind legs and placed its front paws on the lowest porch step. Azure watched, making no move to call the cub back. It was an extraordinary display of trust, allowing her youngest, most vulnerable offspring to approach humans so closely. Noah felt tears filling his eyes. After a lifetime of gradual progress, of careful documentation of each small advance in trust and communication, this gesture struck him as profound beyond words. Azure wasn't just accepting human presence. She was actively introducing the next generation, ensuring the connection would continue. With tremendous effort, Noah pushed himself up from his wheelchair, waving away Ellie's concerned hand. He needed to stand for this moment, to meet Azure's gaze on his feet one last time. He gripped the porch railing, his aged body trembling with the effort, but his eyes clear and focused on the bear who represented the culmination of his life's work. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying in the still evening air. Azure held his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern light. Then, slowly and deliberately, she rose on her hind legs, an enormous, powerful predator making herself vulnerable. She released a long, soft breath that misted in the cooling air, almost like a sigh. The moment stretched between them, man and bear, connected by something deeper than science could measure. In that silent exchange was half a century of mutual respect, of boundaries carefully honored, of trust painstakingly built. Then Azure lowered herself back to all fours. She made a soft chuffing sound to her cub, who immediately returned to her side. With one last look at Noah, she turned and walked back toward the waiting bears. The silent assembly watched for another moment. Then, one by one, melted back into the forest shadows. Noah sank back into his wheelchair, overcome with emotion. Clara climbed into his lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Was she saying goodbye, Grandpa?" she asked, her voice small. Noah held his granddaughter close, thinking of all the goodbyes and hellos that had marked his extraordinary life. The first bear family disappearing into the forest after the fire. Blue's first appearance at his cabin window, the day he had finally been allowed to touch her. The painful farewell, when she had grown too old to visit any more. "No, sweetheart," he said finally, his voice steady despite the tears that slipped down his weathered cheeks. She was saying, "I'll remember." That night, Noah Morgan slept peacefully for the first time in months, the pain that had been his constant companion mysteriously absent. He dreamed of running through endless forest, young and strong again, following a path that seemed to glow with its own light. Ahead of him moved a familiar form, Blue, in her prime, glancing back occasionally as if to ensure he was still following. When Ellie came to check on him in the early dawn light, she found him gone, his body still but his face serene, as if he had simply decided it was time to continue on a journey long in the making. They buried him beneath the old oak tree that marked the border between the Morgan property and the forest, in accordance with his wishes. The simple headstone bore only his name, the dates of his birth and death, and 5 words that encompassed his life's meaning. Kindness crosses every boundary. The morning of the burial, the forest was unusually silent. No birds sang, no small creatures rustled in the underbrush. It was as if the natural world itself observed a moment of respect. As the small gathering of family and colleagues dispersed, Ellie lingered by the fresh grave, unwilling to leave her father to the solitude of the forest just yet. Clara stood beside her, solemn in her child's understanding of the finality of death. "Mom," Clara whispered suddenly, tugging at Ellie's hand. "Look." At the forest edge stood Azure, motionless and watchful. Behind her, visible only as shadows among the trees, stood dozens of bears, more than Ellie had ever seen gathered in one place. They made no sound, no movement beyond the gentle rise and fall of their breathing. Ellie felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. This was no coincidence, no random gathering. Somehow, impossibly, the bears knew, and they had come to bear witness in their own way. Azure stepped forward, approaching the grave with measured steps. In her mouth, she carried something that made Ellie's breath catch, a branch of early spring flowers, blooming out of season. With surprising delicacy, the massive bear placed the flowers on the fresh earth of the grave, then backed away, her eyes never leaving the headstone. One by one, the bears behind her emerged from the forest. Each approached the grave, some carrying pine boughs, others with colorful leaves or stones. Each placed their offering beside Azure's flowers, creating a growing circle of natural tributes around the grave of the man who had spent his life building a bridge between their worlds. When the last bear had made its offering, Azure raised her head and released a long, mournful sound that carried through the forest, part growl, part howl, entirely new to human ears. The assembled bears joined her, their combined voices creating a harmony that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. The bear requiem lasted only moments, but to those who heard it, it seemed to contain centuries of meaning. Then, as silently as they had gathered, the bears dispersed, melting back into the forest until only Azure remained. She gazed at Ellie and Clara for a long moment, an acknowledgement passing between them that needed no words. Then she too turned and disappeared among the trees, leaving mother and daughter standing hand in hand beside the flower-covered grave. "Daddy always said it wasn't just about the bears," Ellie said softly, her voice thick with tears. "It was about learning to see the world differently, to recognize intelligence and emotion in all its forms, to understand that kindness isn't just a human virtue." Clara nodded, her young face solemn with understanding beyond her years. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small square of faded blue fabric, a remnant of the original blanket that had been passed down through generations of the Morgan family. "Can I, Mom?" she asked. Ellie nodded, unable to speak. Clara stepped forward and carefully placed the scrap of blue fabric atop the bear's offerings. The sun broke through the clouds at that moment, illuminating the grave in a shaft of golden light that seemed to set the blue fabric glowing against the darker colors of the forest offerings. "It came back to you, Grandpa," Clara whispered, "just like you always said it would." As mother and daughter finally turned to leave, a soft breeze stirred the trees, carrying with it a sense of completion, of a circle drawn perfectly closed. The simple act of compassion that had begun their story, a baby giving his blanket to a shivering bear, had not only changed the relationship between humans and animals in this small corner of the world, but had revealed a profound truth that would ripple outward for generations to come, that the capacity for connection, for empathy, for remembering kindness, exists in all living beings, and in a world that too often built walls between species, between ways of being and knowing, that was truly the most shocking revelation of all.